Okay, the last time I had beer was at a baseball game with Doug.
Okay, so cheers. There
cheers.
You go. There you go. Ooh. That tastes like the beautiful city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
The champagne of beers.
There you go.
Kamala Harris making her much anticipated return to television, cracking open the champagne of beers, a Miller High Life, making me think for a moment she understands why she lost, and she's going to try now to relate to the American people. Boy, was I wrong. Welcome in. I'm Dave Briggs, here with founding editor Colby Hall. Stephen Colbert sat down with Kamala Harris to talk about her forthcoming book, 107 Days, out in the fall. And to me, it was just one big reminder, Colby, of why she lost the election and of why Stephen Colbert, beyond the losing $40 million a year, is failing to really resonate with the broad scope of the American people and failing to hold Democrats to account even when they're sitting right across from him. What did you make of Kamala's appearance last night?
You're coming out hard. You're coming out on fire. I thought it was, kind of flat. I thought it was interesting. I sort of disagree with your take in that this felt more like a therapy session. It was very, touchy-feely. And you had, Kamala Harris was, I thought way more relaxed. And I thought she was selling a book. And the thing that disappointed me the most is, the thing she said more than anything else is you have to buy the book. And, you want to tease it a little bit more. But also, to your point, Colbert's got nothing to lose. Like, he's dead man walking right now. So he knows his viewers are people that largely voted for Kamala. So he's not going to pivot and sort of grill the Democratic candidate who lost. He basically was there to sort of hold her hand and make her feel welcome. And in that regard, I think she succeeded. If you were looking for news or anything sort of critical, you didn't get that. But again, this isn't a political media show. It's a late night show that's increasingly targeted to solely Democrats.
And part of the reason that show, in my account, is being canceled. And Stephen Colbert is not there to be a therapist. But it's interesting you say she was out there to sell a book. Right. Because there was not one reason in a 28-minute interview for me to buy that book or anyone on the left or anyone on the right to buy that book. Now, maybe Jake Tapper said too much in talking about their book about Joe Biden's mental decline. Maybe they gave away too much, but in my estimation, she gave away nothing. No real reason for me to say, ooh, is she even going to talk about the mental decline of Joe Biden? Because let's show a clip. Stephen Colbert gave her at least one opportunity. He didn't press her, but he gave her an opportunity to at least talk about his mental decline or talk about, how she differs from Joe Biden. And here's the result.
What do you think of when you look back at that time and that feeling?
What I look back at is, as I said, how people realized the commonality and the collective strength and our collective love of our country. We love our country. And the thing about that experience is exactly what propels me to think about this moment and the future and not look back too much, which is those same people, they're still here. They still know joy in their hearts. They still know how to have a sense of optimism and faith in the future and to believe and to fight for that. And that hasn't gone away. And I just think it's really important that we never let a circumstance, situation, or person defeat our spirit.
Okay, so she fails to take any opportunity to at least acknowledge that Joe Biden, that she witnessed firsthand his mental decline. She also failed, Colby, to tell the American people, as she did during the campaign, how she's different from Joe Biden, what she would have done different. This was an abject disaster of a campaign, and I saw no reflection whatsoever from a candidate who should never run for president again, and she should absolutely run for governor of California, because that is a miraculous ceiling for her, for someone that is really so empty, that really doesn't have a core, doesn't have a lot to say about anything, continues to just toss word salads out to the American people.
Well, I disagree. I think, she did say that she didn't want to pile on. And I think, she showed grace. Like she worked very closely. She served as his vice president. She owes Biden a great deal of, sort of gratitude for elevating her to that role. And, I think a lot of people would find it kind of like untoward to say, like, oh, he was old and he couldn't do it. I don't expect her to do that. She did say that she was going to run for governor because she thinks the current political system is broken, which to me is a current rationalization and leaves open the idea that depending on how these book sells, that maybe she'll throw her hat in the ring in 2028. I don't think that there's a real appetite, or there's a real I don't think there's a Kamala Harris movement. I disagree, though, in terms of, like, I found that in this interview, it was far less word salady. Her biggest problem on the campaign was that she was so measured in what she wanted to say. She was so afraid that she was going to say something that was going to offend some sort of like identity group or some subgroup, that it ended up being sort of unclear. And in this instance, I thought she had nothing to lose and she was way more calm. And as a result, her messaging or her commentary was relaxed. And if she had been more like this, she would have done better. Remember, she barely lost. She got 75 million votes. That's the third most votes of any candidate. And I remember when Trump lost in 2020, we heard repeatedly on Fox News that 70 million people voted for Trump, and they should be recognized. You never hear that from the Democrats, and I wonder why. Like, 75 million people voted for Kamala Harris, and I think, it's clear that Colbert and Kamala weren't trying to appeal to the Republicans like you or the Trump voters. They knew that 75 million people that voted for her, that's a pretty big market share, right? But to your point, I think, there was a missed opportunity for her to try to bridge a divide. That was not her goal. Her goal was, to try to sell books. If she sells a lot of books, maybe that adds some
Hold
momentum.
on. Tell me one reason you want to read this book. Tell me one thing that she said that makes you think those books behind you there on that shelf that 107 Days believes that should be behind you.
Well, I think that the one thing that sort of stuck out to me was when, and I think they got in some trouble, and I've been critical of them in the past, when, Tim Walz said that we didn't do a very good job of creating our own strategy. We were just blaming Trump, and he was right. But I will say that feels a little bit like sort of, rear view mirror, right? Like sort of, a circular firing straw of Democrats trying to point the finger at one another and blame, sort of the political advisors of Biden that gave him wrong polling data. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I think Kamala Harris was not a victim, but the big villain, and if you're a Democrat, is not Kamala for not winning the race. It's the fact that Joe Biden decided to run again for re-election when it was clear as day that he was too old and no one was going to really vote for him. And so what's sort of unique about this, and why I'm interested in the book, is how do you put together a campaign in whatever the title of the book is, 100 plus days? Like, that's a kind of a stunning story, is that you find out you're going to be the Democratic candidate in late July with like 100 plus days. Like, that's something that we've never seen before. So, when she kind of came out initially, she did pretty well. Like, initially it was like, there's no way she can win, but there was no way that anyone else was going to get that spot. So, had she been tightened her rhetoric in a proper, primary, maybe someone else would have been a better candidate. I think Trump was going to win either way. But I'm interested in how they put together their campaign in 100 days. I covered it too closely, and so I probably won't buy the book anyway, because I probably know most of that stuff anyway. And I'm also not that interested in Kamala Harris. I think she's yesterday's story, not tomorrow's story. And I think that's where my biggest criticism is.
She would like to be tomorrow's story, and she is not. I think she needs to put a nail in this coffin. Look, had she been forced to go through a mini primary with Josh Shapiro or Wes Moore or Bashir or whoever it may be, I do not believe she would have come out on top. Not any way, not any chance she could have held her own on a stage with Josh Shapiro. The party needs to move forward, and she needs to help it do so by saying, I am not running in 2028. But that was always the problem with Joe Biden too, right?
Right.
He always failed to say, I'm going to be a one-term president and I'm going to turn this country over to something else. But the most reflective moment, or lack thereof, in this interview was Stephen Colbert picked up a photo and he shows it to Kamala. It was the moment she got the call with 107 days left that she was going to run. And she has obviously had time to be reflective about this moment. And do you know what she said? You may not remember this part of the interview. It stood out to me because she looked at the photo. I thought, okay, here's going to come some deep soul searching. She talked about the fact that she was wearing headphones with a wire connected to the iPhone because they are more secure. A, they are not more secure, but B, that's your reflection from that moment? The fucking headphones?
Right.
Kamala, just give me a moment that says, I should have drawn a better contrast between
Right.
me and Joe Biden. I should have explained why we shared some responsibility for inflation, but that the economy was still in terrific shape.
Right.
I just see very little, if any, reflection. I do want to play this moment for you just so you see how deep she looked into her past. Listen.
What do you want people to take from the story that you have to tell of those 107 days?
So this book is basically what I would offer as a behind-the-scenes sharing of what it means to run for president. It was an intense experience.
To run for president in a way that no one had run before.
Well, to run for president, period, but certainly in a way that no one had done before in 107 days. I talk about in the book, there are some people who are born or grew up believing I'm going to be president. I want to be president. That wasn't me. It wasn't. I knew I wanted to serve. I knew that. But I think there is something about it all that it can feel very opaque. Like people feel like they know, there's these movies and these television shows, but what really is it like? And I hope by writing this book, one of the things that I do is help people see from the inside what it is in a way that they can see something about themselves that tells them, hey, I could do that, or I have that instinct, or I have seen moments in my own life when I've had to deal with adversity or attacks, but I can still get up and go. There's a lot of personal stuff in the book. Poor Dougie.
You're blowing the lid off of Doug? What's going on?
For example, my birthday's in October. The election's in November. You see where I'm going. And Dougie kind of dropped the ball on my big birthday.
He didn't get you anything?
Oh, you have to read the book.
Okay, so here's the other thing that I want to get your take on, Colby. Look, I know everyone's furious about Stephen Colbert being canceled. I think he's a terrific talent, but I think, as I said earlier, he always failed to at least reach out to the other side, to have a tough interview with Kamala Harris, to have more Republicans on the show. Now, maybe they turned him down. I don't know how the booking process went, but you can see the numbers. They've been posted on Mediaite. They did no effort to really book many Republicans on that show. It was always left-leaning. Here's what Stephen Colbert ought to do next. And I'm sure he's going to launch a podcast, and I'm sure he'll get 20 million, and I'm sure it'll be actually a pretty successful show because he's extraordinarily talented. He has huge connections. He should shut the hell up and run for president. That's what he should do. I'm not even joking. I would love to hear him in the fight. Right. I would actually love to see what would become of a Stephen Colbert campaign. Maybe he too would get, destroyed by the likes of Wes Moore or Shapiro or Bashir, the people that I think have a real shot. Maybe Pete Buttigieg, but I would love to see it. What about you?
Funny. The truth of the matter is the Democrats really should probably take a page from the Republicans. Trump was sort of a art of the deal, but his real rise to sort of national fame in, the latter stage of his career was hosting, The Apprentice, right? And so the idea that we can sort of you have to be a sort of a lifelong sort of elected official to be president. Those days are gone. And in fact, today I just wrote a post. Charlemagne the God was on with Laura Trump, and I got a teaser clip from Fox News. And what does he say? He thinks he'd like to see Jon Stewart run for president, and his running mate should be Stephen Colbert. And he's serious about this. And Charlemagne's a respected, smart, great dude. And what his point is to your point, is like, yeah, get in the game, right? Like that's the thing. Look, I think the reason Colbert, there's a couple of things going on here. I think Colbert is an incredibly great dude. I think he's very, very talented. The model of that sort of massive 220 employee, $100 million budget show just doesn't work anymore, right? And his first year in that role wasn't very good. He didn't get very good ratings, and it wasn't until he really pivoted to being more anti-Trump in the first Trump administration, his ratings popped. The second term, and I think this speaks to a larger sort of trend, the anti-Trump, never Trump thing is tired. It doesn't work, right? And so that didn't really work. I think Colbert painted himself in something of a partisan anti-Trump corner, but less people are watching TV in that realm. So I think Paramount kind of canceled him to appease Trump so that they could get their deal through. I think the economics of a show that big don't work. Look at Gutfeld. He's got like 10 writers. He does a show that gets a better rating with like a studio audience of 50 people at Fox News. Put Colbert in that sort of format where it's a lot more authentic and he's more quick-witted, he would kill. And instead of it being a $100 million a year budget, it would be a $10 million budget. I don't know that people will still watch it on TV because people aren't watching TV anymore. But yeah, I think Colbert doesn't care now. So he's, when he has Kamala on, he's not looking to grill her.
But he's not looking to make news either, and that's
he's not a news guy. He's an entertainer, right? So like,
but that wasn't an entertaining interview.
Well, if you're from your perspective, but I think if you're a Kamala fan, you were delighted. And getting back to the earlier thing, this was therapy. And I think the one thing that sort of came out about this is that she said that she sort of gave clues like, it was tough. These are bad memories. The day she lost was a really bad day. Her husband forgot her birthday. Like, I think the subtext of that was that, being in a national campaign is tough because you are attacked vocally by, a massive conservative media ecosystem, President Trump, who's a really effective insult artist. And I think that beat her up emotionally. And it took her, it's been 6 months, maybe 7, it's been 9 months. It's taken her that time to sort of heal. And I think that's the subtext of what was going on there. And that's why Colbert was the place to go. And this was probably agreed by, with pre-production, said like, look, she'll go on your show to promote the book, hype the book, but she's not looking for a grilling. And Colbert, I'm sure, was like, you know what, this is friendly territory. And so that's what was good for Democrats who wanted to see this. But also to your point, why it sort of failed to appeal to a broader audience, and that's the divided America that we live in.
Yeah, and Stephen Colbert has an opportunity there to go out and change some people's mind and show that he is more than a softball left-leaning comedian, and that's why I think I would love to see him run.
Well,
and Kamala Harris just, again, failed to show the fire that I saw twice when she ran a campaign. So to your point, do you think Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, to Charlemagne the God's point, might be the right man for this moment?
Well, I don't. And I think more importantly, and I have good friends that worked at The Daily Show, that worked with Colbert very closely, who are still in touch with them. Unless something changes, and something could change, Colbert's worth a ton of money. He's 62 years old. He doesn't need that. Neither Colbert or Stewart have ever expressed any political ambition. In much the same way Tucker Carlson has been said, like, well, you should run for president. And he's like, why would I want to do that? That's the worst idea possible because I have a lot of money. I have a lot of freedom. Unless you want power, like being in the White House, like not everyone wants to be president. So I don't think that's a realistic expectation, though I think things will change. I will say one last clip. At the end was the most notable, I thought, interview moment where Colbert flatly asked, who's the leader of the Democratic Party? Let's watch that clip.
I'm just curious.
There are lots of leaders. And
there's generally a leader of the Democratic Party. Like, oh, that's the leader of the Democratic Party. Who comes to mind?
I think there are a lot of, I'm not going to go through names because then I'm going to leave somebody out and then I'm going to hear about it. But let me just, Let me say this. I think it is a mistake for us who want to figure out how to get out and through this and get out of it to put it on the shoulders of any one person. It's really on all of our shoulders. It really is.
There was an opportunity for her to say, "Look, I'm the sort of the nominee. It's me." She could have said any number of names. What did she say? There's a lot of leaders. And then she said, "I'm not going to name any names because I'll leave someone out." It was the perfect illustration, I think, of the current sort of aimless nature of the Democratic Party right now. But if you are a Democrat, I will say there is some hope that it's always darkest before dawn, and it's pretty dark right now. So it is an open field for anyone from Andy Bashir, Josh Shapiro, Jon Stewart, Dave Briggs could switch parties and become Democratic. There you go. He's the centrist that we need. So I thought that was the only really newsworthy thing. And it wasn't really because there were news. The news was that she failed to answer. So
The news, says Colby Hall, was the lack of news in this interview. And I can't really, though we've disagreed about a lot here, I can't fight you on that. So as we wrap this up, the betting markets have Gavin Newsom as the overwhelming favorite. They have AOC and they have Pete Buttigieg as the top three. I genuinely don't think any of those three is the best candidate for the party. I continue to make no secret that I think Josh Shapiro is the governor of Pennsylvania. One last thing before we go. One Democrat you think could take on J.D. Vance and win?
Well, I think it's going to be Marco Rubio and not J.D. Vance.
Oh.
That's the headline. And I think Gavin Newsom would be the best candidate if he represented any other state than California. I go with Josh Shapiro. I think Josh Shapiro is, he's Obama 2.0 in his way. So I think Josh Shapiro would probably be the best candidate if you're a Democrat because he's a centrist. And I think center left is what's going to bridge the divide. That's why I think Marco Rubio, I think the pendulum will swing back to the middle. I think that's why Marco Rubio is a center right guy established. He's still the only guy in the Republican Party that's kind of connected to Reagan. That's why I think, but who knows? There's 3 years left. So I'm always wrong anyway. So ignore what I say.
Took us 20 minutes, but we found some agreement there at the end. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We want to hear from you. Who do you think is the one Democrat that can take on either Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance or a third Trump term, which we know is going to be teased about until this thing is over? Good to see you, my friend.
Good stuff.